Lennox and Addington.
Canadians are out of money, and this spend Liberal government is completely out of touch. People are losing confidence, faith, and patience. Simply put, Mr. Speaker, people cannot afford these record-high taxes and inflation any longer. They are sinking in debt. Families, business owners, seniors, students, all Canadians expect more from their government. Mr. Speaker, when will this Prime Minister commit to no new spending and no new taxes?
The Honourable Minister for Families.
Sure, you know what Canadians can't afford? They can't afford an official opposition that is proposing cuts, and cuts to the things that they rely upon, like employment insurance, Mr. Speaker, like the Canada Pension Plan, Mr. Speaker, like the Canada Child Benefit, Mr. Speaker, like affordable daycare, like Canada Dental Benefits, like housing supports, Mr. Speaker. What Canadians can't afford right now when they're feeling the economic pinch is the cruel spending cuts that the Conservatives are suggesting.
The Honourable Member for Hastings, Lennox and Addington.
Mr. Speaker, what Canadians can't afford are no new taxes.
Exactly.
This Liberal government and their NDP backers have routinely made their intentions to Canadians very clear. They're going to implement a punitive tax on financially broken Canadians to pay for their higher spending agenda. Mr. Speaker, how can Canadians trust a government that has openly shown disrespect to them?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives, at every opportunity over the last 7 years, have voted against measures that have supported Canadians, whether it's Canadian children, families, seniors, people who are in need of housing, whether it's Canadians with disabilities, Mr. Speaker. We have brought forward important measures that add thousands of dollars into the pockets of our most vulnerable, of middle-class Canadians who are spending it on basic necessities. Mr. Speaker, what Canadians don't trust is the official opposition that's not there for them in their time of need.
The Honourable Member for Beauport-Limoilou. Mr. Speaker, $1.3 million. That was the cost of the Governor General's unnecessarily week-long trip to the Middle East. And that is the figure that the Canadian Taxpayers Federation arrived at when it tallied up the bills for the Governor General's office, but also for global affairs, defence, and the RCMP. It turns out the monarchy costs even more than we think. In addition to the $70 million it costs every year, you have to add the bills passed on to various government departments for first-class travel by the King's representative and his entourage. Seriously, when are we going to stop paying for this? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Governor General undertakes important work representing Canada at home and abroad. Costs are a product of a number of factors, including the size of delegations, destination, and local fees. Mr. Speaker, as always, our government makes every effort to ensure that spending on official trips is responsible and transparent. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Beauport-Limoilou. Mr. Speaker, the cost of monarchy doesn't just cost a lot in terms of money. Let me take you back to 2019 with the case of the two Michaels wrongfully imprisoned in China. Last Thursday, the Wall Street Journal revealed that in this case, the Prime Minister was unable to negotiate with the Chinese President Xi Jinping. Why? Simply, the Chinese head of state refused to speak with the Prime Minister, demanding instead to speak to the real head of state of Canada, Queen Elizabeth II. Doesn't the government find it embarrassing that the real head of state of Canada is a foreign monarch? The
Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, the world is facing a more assertive China. At all times, Canada's foreign policy will be able to defend our national interests and our values. In this context, Canadians expect us to navigate strategically through this complex reality. We will do so with eyes wide open. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Lakeland.
Mr. Speaker, the more the Liberals tax and spend, the more expensive life gets for struggling Canadians. This Prime Minister racked up more debt than all others before him combined, and he claimed it was so Canadians wouldn't have to. But today, Canadians can't make ends meet while government contracts are up 74%, $14.6 billion a year to insiders, former Liberal MPs, anti-Semites, foreign consultants, consultants and hundreds of millions the Liberals won't account for at all. When will the NDP Liberal costly coalition stop their tax hikes and wasteful spending?
The Honourable Minister for Tourism.
Mr. Speaker, later today we're going to learn more about our fall economic statement, but the Conservative Economic Action Plan 2022 is in. Cut employment insurance benefits, cut Canadian pension plan, cut child care benefits, cut climate action checks. Mr. Speaker, typical Conservative austerity in the face of Canadians in need. Mr. Speaker, we've got the backs of Canadians. We're investing in them. That's our plan. That's what we're going to do.
Honourable Member for Lakeland.
But in fact, Canadians' paychecks and savings go up in flames as the Liberals fuel the inflation fire that they set. The Bank of Canada says inflation is due to what's happening in Canada. BMO says sending checks as inflation support is inflationary. Even Liberal Mark Carney says inflation is, quote, a domestic story. Canadians are using food banks at record levels. Half are almost bankrupt, and 1 million can't afford home heating. Now, the Liberals are fine with spending the average Canadian's yearly rent on a single hotel room, but will they actually give Canadians a break, cut taxes, and cap spending?
The Honourable Minister Tourism.
Mr. Speaker, Stephen Polo's former Bank of Canada governor was very clear that our investments in Canadians during the pandemic prevented a deflation in our economy. What do the Conservatives say on taxes, Mr. Speaker? When we lowered them on the middle class in 2015, how did the Conservatives vote? Against. When we lowered taxes on Canadians in 2019, the Conservatives voted against. In 2021, when we lowered them on workers, how did the Conservatives vote? Against. And when we lowered them on small businesses this year, Mr. Speaker, they voted once again against. How do they vote on dental and rental? You know the answer. It's against.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Wetaskiwin.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let's talk about the real effect of Liberal economic policy. The original Trudeau spending legacy was 14 deficits in 15 years, an inflation, housing, and energy crisis for Canadians at the time, and as a result of the crippling debt, devastating cuts to health and education transfers a generation later by another Liberal government. It's the classic Liberal economic 1-2 punch. Short-term pain and long-term pain.
Yeah.
Would somebody please have the courage to stand up over there and tell their Prime Minister to just stop making the problem